Hey everyone, welcome to the Industry Show. I'm your host Nitin Bajaj, and joining me today is Diana Zhang. Diana, welcome on the show.
Hi, Nitin. It's so wonderful to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. So let's start with who is Diana?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, I always introduce myself as a mom. I have a 5-year-old named Lily and a 2.5-year-old named Teddy, so shout out to them. And in my normal day job, as I like to describe it, I'm a 15-year executive at a global asset management firm out here in Connecticut. And, I've run everything from our investment research department to our corporate real estate to our firm's various talent programs. And these days, professionally, I'm actually doing something completely different. I find myself as the co founder and CEO of NeighborShare, a startup nonprofit, which is what we're here to discuss today. And then some more information on the personal side. Let's see. I'm a first generation immigrant. I was born in China and moved here when I was around 5 and have sort of, moved throughout the States, but always sort of in the New England area. And besides NeighborShare, I would say that I'm also very passionate about food. I'm really passionate about eating it, cooking it, sharing it, traveling for it, and also about advocating on behalf of those who lack access to it. And as part of that, I'm also a board member of Connecticut Foodshare, which is our statewide food bank in Connecticut.
That sounds awesome. So,
Thank you.
we will talk about NeighborShare. Let's talk a little bit about why do this, right?
Yeah. So why do this in terms of why I'm doing it, or why we're doing it in terms of why NeighborShare in terms of the organization's mission?
Yeah, both. And then, if I could add a third element to it, why now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and great question. So, in terms of the why neighbor share, I personally was very struck when my co-founder called me and sharing some initial ideas, et cetera. But he cited this statistic that literally became one of our rallying cries, right? Which is that 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. That, by the way, was a statistic that was shared by the Federal Reserve back in 2018, 2019, way before the pandemic. And
Yeah.
then you see the pandemic striking, right? Where, almost overnight, you saw this sort of like this avalanche of need that was basically just unleashed by just the implications of needing to shut down our communities, whatever else. And that's basically why NeighborShare exists, right? And why NeighborShare exists right now,
Yes.
right? Where, our whole organization's mission is really around empowering what we call our community's frontline heroes with a new resource they can go to help sort of our fellow neighbors and families through these pivotal moments of need of $400 or less, right? So this whole notion of how can we come together as neighbors helping neighbors to create almost an extra layer of safety net when other options have run out. And so that's sort of like the meta version of sort of, why NeighborShare and why now. And then for myself personally, as I was saying in my introduction in terms of hey, I kind of am unexpectedly here as the co-founder and CEO of NeighborShare when I was, working at a hedge fund for 15 years of my career. I think it's I know that personally, as I got more into it and just both learned more about the state of need in our communities, and also got more and more into just the intricacies of what it means to build an organization from scratch. And I know I'm talking to a lot of fellow entrepreneurs out there. It was a combination of becoming more and more passionate and energized by the need that our communities are calling out for, and how we really need an innovative solution to help once again create this safety net. And then on the other end, I think it's like, not gonna lie, I think I got a little bit, bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, right? Like I also love just the challenge of building this thing, right? And how do we really build and galvanize what we hope to be through time a national movement to really once again create this sort of dynamic of neighbors helping neighbors in this very sort of like targeted type of way. And so that's sort of the why for me, and why sort of you see me so passionate about this today.
And I love the initiative, right? And being a resource and to be able to help our own neighbors and make an impact in their lives. That's such a tremendous opportunity, but also at the same time, in this particular time of need, talk about timing and you kind of bringing this together during the pandemic. Give us a sense of the size and scale of your operations and most importantly, the impact that NeighborShare has been able to create and will continue to in the
Yeah.
near future.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before I actually jump into some of our key metrics, I'd actually love to take a moment to just describe a bit more about how our model works, because then that way you'll better understand the metrics basically that I'll be citing. And so, when we really first started NeighborShare back in the beginning, we really started with this problem statement of how do we get direct help to the people who need it the most in our communities when they need it, right? And if you really think about it, we realized that it was actually pretty hard to just go and just know which
Mhm.
families in your neighborhood actually needed help in that moment, right? Like as the
Mhm.
typical donor, and I was totally that typical donor like a year and a half ago, right? You can't just walk down the street and be like, hey, Nitin, I know that,
Mhm.
the neighbors in, 100 blah, like, and in that house will need, you need an extra helping hand, right?
Mhm.
And so we realized that to really get to these, real individualized grassroots levels, you really need boots on the ground, right? And
Mhm.
so what we decided to do with our model is we decided to do this by partnering with just really wonderful local nonprofit organizations all over the country and
Mhm.
really empowering the frontline staff, what we call our frontline heroes, right? The case managers, the social workers, it could be the teachers at the schools partnering with the organizations, right? The folks
Mhm.
who intimately know their communities. And we basically empower them to sort of identify and validate these pivotal moments of need, right? Once again, at $400 or less, and then give them a way to spotlight them on our platform at nbshare.org.
Mhm.
And then really also as part of completing the cycle, we also then provide donors a really sort of like tangible, validated, trustworthy way to make impact and help a neighbor immediately today, right? And then
Love
to
that.
that end, about a bit over a year into our efforts, since it started out grassroots, sort of like as a nights and weekends volunteer-driven type
Mhm.
project, I'm really proud to say that we have around 60 active nonprofit partners in our network
Wow.
across 25 different states. They range everywhere from after-school education programs to homeless shelters to domestic abuse centers, veteran centers. Like, I mean, we run the gamut, right? Because basically every single walk of life might hit a moment of need like this that we're
True.
talking about, right? And at this point, we've directly helped almost 3,000 neighbors across the country, and are helping more every day. And that's sort of a statistic that I'm really really proud of. And I would say that these 3,000 neighbors, like the folks that we're helping with, they really truly reflect the fabric of the communities that we're serving, right? We've
Mhm.
helped veterans, single parents, teenagers looking to get out of gang life, women looking to get out of their abusive situations, refugees from Afghanistan, after the turmoil there a few months ago. Like, we're really sort of covering the gamut and once again just touching lives in a really direct way. And then let's see, I think one other stat I'd love to share is that, look, I'm also really proud of the fact that, almost all of this, let's call it like 98% of this progress has been powered by basically like an all volunteer team. We have an incredible volunteer team of around 25 to 30 people across the country who basically take their specific skills from their day job and they port it over pro bono to NeighborShare nights and weekends with, like, the kind of obsessive you'll be like, hey, where's that thing? And, we've basically come together to build a startup together.
Mhm.
And it's been incredible because it was an organization built during COVID. And so actually last Thursday was the first time I met a lot of the volunteers in person for the first time after 18 months of working together in person in New York. We did our first ever holiday event and it was like tears and emotion and whatever, because can you imagine? It's just all
That's
these
awesome.
passionate people who had only met via Zoom screen
Mhm.
saying, I'm jumping in, I'm going to build this startup, even though I know what a grind it is, and we're going to go help. And so, it's been incredible in that way too. And so, as much as I'm proud of the social impact we're making, I'm also really proud of the NeighborShare community we've been able to build as well.
That's such an inspiring story. And, on two fronts. One, that you're able to help the most vulnerable population we have, right? And make such a significant impact on their lives to be able to transform them just by giving them this basic necessity, right? I mean, these times are some, extraordinary, right? Beyond what we could have imagined. But to be able to give them that safety net by building this network and working across, I mean, you can validate this, but having worked in the nonprofit sector for a while myself, the compounding effects are astounding, right? And to have these numbers in the first year, that's really amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then to your point, Nitin, it's about the thing I'm really proud of is it's us getting to these folks at this particular pivotal moment of need,
Yes.
right? And that's where
Hmm.
our model of having these frontline heroes is so important, because we're here to really work with our frontline heroes to identify the moments where, just think about it, right? It was $400 or less. We know we're not talking the big astronomical medical bills, etc. it's those smaller moments where, a relatively small amount of money can have really outsized impact, right? It's those moments that if you get to it real time, it's when there's an emergency that can be prevented from spiraling into a crisis.
Hmm.
Or it's the moments when you're removing that like last mile barrier. It's just like literally that last mile where that person, in working with the great programs, in their community with the
Hmm.
nonprofits or the government programs or whatever it is, they literally just need a little bit of that last barrier removed to help them make a step change improvement in their lives, right? And so those are the types of moments we're touching, and those are the ones that, to your point, just the compounded impact of that, right? So like get to that $300 car repair right now
Hmm.
so that you can avoid the spiral that can
Yeah.
get you to like literally within 3-4 weeks into like literally risk of homelessness. Like imagine all the resources you actually prevent from needing to go into that case because you caught this pivot at the exact right moment, right? So that's exactly what's about. I love that you brought up that point.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's so easy to, if you don't have control in that moment, for that to become a crisis. I mean, you mentioned, a $300 car repair, which, if not prevented, could lead to you not making it for your job, losing your insurance, and and so on and so forth. And before you know it, like you said, 2, 3 weeks down the line, you're looking at bankruptcy, losing your home.
That's right. And from a car repair, that most of
Yeah.
us would be like, "Hey, that's an annoyance, but not the thing that will devastate my life." And yet, these are the moments that are very real for a lot of our neighbors. And so that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to create that safety net.
Let's talk a little about, as we are talking about these moments, what's the biggest challenge you face as an organization, as a team?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was reflecting on this question before we got online, and
Mhm.
it's almost hard to synthesize it into one, right? Because it's all the challenges of what it means to build a startup. And then I
Mhm.
know that fellow entrepreneurs out there, there's many, right? I mean, there's everything from, learning how to fundraise in the nonprofit space,
Yes.
right? Like I can tell you, it is completely different from fundraising the for-profit space, right? Like we have this like stellar board who can raise all sorts of money for their startup ventures, et cetera, and then you get into the nonprofit space and you just, you like we've needed to learn and deeply understand just like
Mhm.
the the sort of like the psychology and logic that goes behind a donor making a nonprofit
Mhm.
contribution is just completely different from you talking to the same person and pitching them a for-profit idea, right? So that's like a challenge that we've embraced and we're like deep into it and whatever else. But geez, like I would be amiss to not say, hey,
Mhm.
like that's like a real thing, especially for nonprofits, right? And so for all the nonprofit entrepreneurs and executives and development executives out there, like wow, I feel your pain because like it's really hard to do, right? And it takes a lot of grit and determination
Mhm.
to keep on going. Another one that I continue to just evolve my management approach on is just continuing to build and motivate that largely volunteer team, right? It's sort of something that I'm really proud of, and it's something that's enabled us to create beautiful product and create really great progress with very low overhead.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you can imagine all the trade-offs and challenges of managing a volunteer team, right? How do you create sort of like a flexible and empathetic type of environment where you know that most of your staff aren't actually able to treat your organization as the number one
Yeah.
priority. Like it's by default, it has to be the third and fourth or whatever because they have families and jobs and all that stuff. So that's been an interesting challenge that I feel like has actually helped me evolve a ton as a leader and a leader of
Mhm.
people because basically I've had to take all my management tricks from my for-profit days and now manage this new group, but lose the biggest lever most managers have, right? Which is compensation, right? So
Mhm.
that's been really interesting. And then last but not least, another really interesting thing is just sort of like what it's taken to really go in and disrupt the industry, right? Because like I'm not gonna lie, like I went in kind of naively because we went in just with this notion of like, wouldn't it be great to
Mhm.
just have this new resource, right, for
Right.
our nonprofit staff to help somebody that they otherwise would have to say no to,
Right.
right? Like we didn't go in with the intention of disrupting. We're like, let's
Mhm.
just build a new resource, right? And then what we've learned is that the model we're proposing is actually very disruptive to the nonprofit industry, right? Where the typical nonprofit structured such that you fundraise centrally and then you drive your programs and that's your scope and
Mhm.
that's what you do. And instead we're coming in and saying, hey, wouldn't it be great for you to continue doing the wonderful work you're doing, but in addition act as this conduit, be our source and our validators of these needs on the ground, and act as a conduit to get direct resources back to the person, right? So do the
Mhm.
programs but also help the person directly. And that's been really interesting, right? Like there's definitely been moments earlier this year when I'm like ripping my hair out, being like, wait, we're not even trying to disrupt. Why are you reacting this way? But like learning some, like our target audience, learning sort of how to sell through and learning how to deeply empathize with how nonprofit executives think and make decisions, right? So that's also been a really interesting business challenge that I gotta say, if you were talking to me, week 1 or 2 of NeighborShare, I would have been like, that's the easiest part. Like, let's worry about the other pieces first, right? But no, of course, like that part turned out to be really interesting and challenging as well. So that's just off the top of my head in terms of some of the big challenges we face and continue to face, right?
Uh, yeah, no small task. And but if you look at the flip side, right, and we briefly talked about this, but would love to hear a little more on this, is what is the biggest opportunity you're targeting?
Yeah, I love this question. It's so great to complete the other side of the coin. Um, like I think our vision for NeighborShare is to really ultimately build it so that it can become a true national movement that's literally touching every single corner of every single state, right? Because once again, like this notion, like 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency, right? I mean, like we know this type of need, that the type of need that's slipping through the cracks, it's literally touching so many folks in all walks of life. And and so in terms of like driving to a vision that's that big, like the way we're thinking about it is, while we're going to do what it takes to keep on building toward this mission brick by brick on the ground, right? Donor by donor, we're going to gain it. Like, partner org by partner, we're going to go through it. We're also really looking at the opportunity to really figure out how to land, almost like think of it as like the right strategic partner or partners who can really help us sort of leapfrog the scale and impact of our current model, which is still more like almost like a proof of concept stage, to really get to that next level of impact, right? Because this model is really compelling, right? And it's of the times, right? It's like it's super tangible impact. It's one-to-one connection with a person in need, and it's hyper local and hyper targeted, right? You know exactly where your money is going. You know exactly the impact you're making. And so, we're, one of the big opportunities we're really driving and doing research and starting some conversations on is like, once again, figuring out the partners who can either bring, and just think of it, who can either bring like the funding, right, to go fill lots of needs at scale as we identify them, and or have the distribution networks, right, so that we can get these needs in front of lots of eyeballs and potential donors, right? And so sort of like, and you can imagine my prospects list a mile long in terms of all the different corporations, et cetera, that I think can have like a mutually beneficial partnership with NeighborShare, or even in certain ways, maybe they can like take it on and white label it. Like, there's like a little bit of no pride of ownership here. I mainly want to see this model come to life in a bigger way so that we can just continue helping more and more people, right? So that the next time you and I are talking, it's not 3,000 neighbors, right? It's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, because we certainly know that we as a country need that type of help, right? So that's one of the big sort of north stars and opportunities that we're pursuing these days.
It sounds really exciting, right? And I do see the path to it. I'm also curious about, you mentioned the $400 number. Given the inflation where it's at been, right, and it's projected to continue to stay there for a bit, how does that impact that $400 number?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and you're actually the first one to ask me of it. I think that's like a really interesting point. I think the way we'll probably want to evolve that loop on that is mainly to do what we consistently do, right? Which is like staying in close touch with our frontline heroes on the ground, right? Because they'll let us know when like, hey, this feels a little bit too low, or this is not going to be enough, etc. Because like they're the ones who see the first signals, right? Sort of like the implications coming through the
Hmm.
whatever. And so I think as long as we're maintaining just our pulse on the ground with our frontline heroes and listening to their feedback and consistently just being willing to evolve our model, right? I think that's going to be the important thing for both the current period we're going through now, and then who knows what other curveballs the world will throw at us later, right?
So true. Diana, as you look back in the rearview mirror, just even not with NeighborShare, but in your professional career, what are moments that stand out for you? One, from a lessons learned perspective, things that didn't go as you had expected, but ended up being great teachers, right? A great teaching moment, a great learning moment. And on the other side, a success story that you're really proud to share. Would love to
Yeah.
hear both of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think on the lessons learned side, I think one of the key things that I've been reflecting on a lot is it's like the theme of courage,
Hmm.
right? Like I feel like I'm someone who has, worked through just like different sort of challenges with my own self-confidence, right? Of believing in myself and like working myself up to make that ask, to make that whatever. And one of the things I've loved about NeighborShare is that it's really sort of like unleashed me from that.
Mm.
right? And I think part of that bravery came from the no, but now advocating on behalf of others. But it's sort of like
Yeah.
just learning to like, look, man, if you don't ask, the answer is automatically no, right?
Yes.
So like just building this background, this courage, to be like, you know what, this mission is worthy. It is
Hmm.
well thought through. It like needs to exist in the world and just going forth. And so like a huge personal lesson for me has been like, wow, like what's the like just how much more impact it could have made. Like I'm proud of
Hmm.
my career so far, et cetera. But like when I think back to, professional world, whatever, all these things, I just think about how much more impact I could have made if I were just that much braver, right? If that was just that much more confident and that much like just had
Yeah.
courage, right? And so that's like a key thing that that I continue to reflect on and stare at and continue to push myself and hold a high bar for, right? I'm also looking into the future, right? So that's, I know it's not specifically the thing that failed and whatever, but I feel like
Oh.
it's like a meta theme for myself that I've been reflecting on a lot, as we go into year end. And then in terms of success story, like I think this might sound cheesy, but like I really consider every single need that's been
Mhm.
filled in our platform to be like a true standalone success
Yes.
story, right? Because that just think about that's literally a life that was tangibly touched and
Hmm.
changed today,
Yeah.
right? And and all the needs flow through my inbox. Like I read through everything that comes through, right? And so it's like I'm thinking about like this very compelling young woman who came to our platform. She, is a refugee from Afghanistan, the
Hmm.
oldest of five daughters, who's now in the States with her parents and her four younger sisters, who has been saving for like 2.5 years to start her college education. Right. And then it was literally a few months ago when she was just about ready to put in that first check to finally start her college education. Like a family emergency happened and she had to dip into that fund. And so she was literally at risk of not being able to make that first semester. Like it would be another year of waiting. Right. And it's like, boom, $400 from NeighborShare. It was like actually enough to get her to over the edge to get that first check in to start her college education. Like we were able to
That's
like make
awesome.
sure she stayed on track, right? And it's like that like blew my mind, right?
That
Because like
is.
to your point, Nathan, you're like, well, with inflation, 400, like how could no, it can make that much of a difference, right? Um, or there's this one from like a few weeks ago as well, like this like 17-year-old teenage father,
Mhm.
right? Who is, working with one of our local organizations to try to improve his life and to build sort of like a more of a living and a stable living for his new baby. And he got stuck because he literally couldn't afford the $150 he needed.
Hmm.
It was like $125 to get his training certification to be a security guard and $25 for the bus ticket back and forth to go to that training. When I was talking about that last mile blocker, like that was
Oh,
the
wow.
last mile blocker. And then by the way, though, that partner organization who did a great job, got him connected, that they didn't have that money. It's not in their budget. Like nonprofits don't just have like miscellaneous budget to fill, like bus tickets and whatever. Those are the types of moments we're talking about, right? And so that's why it's sort of like, we actually have weekly volunteer team meetings to come together so I can update folks on our progress, etc. And we kick off each meeting with like, here are 5 folks we helped with this week. Because every single one of those is a success story, right? And every single one of those desires like that moment of attention and reflection that like, hey, we touched someone's life today in Kentucky or Oklahoma or California, right? And so that's sort of, I don't know, like that's sort of like how I think about it within our context.
These are amazing, powerful stories, and things. Of course, on one end, as a leader, you need them to channel the volunteers and keep them engaged and inspired and motivated. But then, the impact you're able to make on those lives. I mean, I can't imagine if this person was not able to go to college. Who knows if she would have waited another year, right? We could have lost her to the system, to so
So
many
many other
different things.
challenges. Exactly.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
amazing. I mean, I
Oh,
love what you're doing. So kudos to you.
thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's what keeps me going, I gotta say. When the moments get
Yeah,
tough, you just go back to the neighbors you're helping, right?
yeah. And let's talk about some of these moments that I would love for you to share with us as one-line life lessons, right? Things that you can share with other entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and people who, are just looking for some inspirations. And the reason we do this as one-liners is because we are all, lacking for time and attention. And if in a quick second or two, in one glance, if we can help change someone's life in the right direction, it's all worth it, right? So, with that, I would urge you to share some of your life lessons with us.
I love it. I love it. So my first one is um this is one I made up myself actually. The grass isn't greener on the other side. It's just a different shade of green.
I love that. That is so cool. Yes.
And I use that a lot because it just helps give you perspective,
Hmm.
right? Like when the going gets tough, just the other side of the fence, the
Yes.
going's just tough in a different way right now. It's okay, right? And then we all have our advantages and disadvantages and whatever. So that's a key one I remind myself of sometimes when I'm like, oh, woe is me, right? Like no, like it's sort of the same for all, right? Um, Another one that I ascribe to a lot, and this comes from Ray Dalio, the founder of the
Hmm.
firm that I work for,
Yeah.
is knowing how to deal with not knowing
Hmm.
is more important than anything you actually know. um, and and that's been incredibly important, especially me going to, like, first time CEO, first time founder, first
Hmm.
time running a nonprofit, like all these things, right? Like, geez, like like a really really imperative and important principle for me to keep in mind as I navigate these challenges. Another one that I also hold on to a lot is, look, like, sustaining your grit and determination is over half the battle,
Hmm.
right? Like that's just like a
Yes.
key one. I just remind myself of that, and now I think I now truly more viscerally understand when folks used to say like entrepreneur is all about grit and
Yeah.
blah and all that. It's like, whoa, I get
Now
it,
you're
all the ups
living
and
it.
downs and
Yeah.
the real time it takes, right? Like,
Hmm.
I feel like the overnight successes we like to point to, it's like, hey, it took 10 years for that
Yes.
overnight success, right? And so then now you feel what it means to like travel that 10-year journey. So that's an
Hmm.
important one for me. Another one is the one I mentioned before, which is if you don't ask, the answer is automatically no,
Yeah.
right? The and then, last but not least, which is actually one that I found on your website, and I really
Hmm.
loved it when I was scrolling through it, and I was like, that's so right. Is ideas are a commodity,
Hmm.
execution of them is not.
Yes.
And I actually say that because I always used to almost like self-critique myself as like, but I'm not like the big ideas person, right? I'm never gonna be the
Hmm.
Steve Jobs who thinks of the next iPhone, etc. And then now I've come to really appreciate the role I play in that, though, right? Which is I can take a big idea and actually make it happen. And that's just as important, if not more important, right? And so that's like a key one that I also ascribe to as part of just also reminding myself of like just the value and worth that I bring to the table in building toward big missions and ideas.
I
So those are
especially
those are
love
my
that one.
five.
Thanks for sharing those. And the last one I think I can relate to a lot because at some point in life I figured out that I'm not an innovator, right? I'm not the one to sit and think and get fixated with a problem. I'm more of the kind where I'll say, what's a workaround to this, right? Let's keep moving. Which, as good as it may be from an operational perspective, because you keep things moving in the right direction, it is also a hindrance when it comes to, there are people who get fixated and a new thing is born out of that, right? And I always, just like you said, I always thought that's a negative because I can't come up with ideas. It took me a while to figure that out. Took me a few mentors, few guides to say,
Yeah,
hey, you know, you both play a part in this. That's how the team
exactly.
comes together. So I'm glad
Exactly.
you talked about it because there are a lot of people out there that tend to think that being the innovator is the sexy, cool, the cool kid job,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
that couldn't be further from the truth. So thanks for bringing
Exactly.
that up. Diana, thank you so much for sharing your lessons and most importantly for doing what you do and helping this community come together and move us all in the right direction. Thank you for making the time and would love to have you back and hopefully you've added a few more zeros to the neighbors we are helping.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Nitin. This was such a privilege and a pleasure, and anyways, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.